Today we have the 2022 Nissan Frontier Crew Cab. This is the Pro 4X model, and we're going to be installing the Alpha and Bravo roof rack for this truck. The major components for your Bravo rack are your load bars. There will be 8 of these in your kit. They are all the same length, same size. They can be used at any position. Then you've got 2 sides in here. They're a mirror image of each other. Driver, passenger for the Bravo rack really doesn't matter. Your windscreen, which this is a no cut. You could have different options on this based on what you guys ordered from us. If you've got lighting to install in it, I recommend that you check out our lighting video before you get to this part, because in some instances we say to put the lighting in prior to putting it on the truck. In others, we want you to do it after. That's typically a weight thing, just because some lighting arrays weigh so much that makes the roof racks front heavy. So don't just take it for granted, go check that video out. You'll also have your mounting system, which is a 2-piece design with the rivet base and the load bar clamp. There will be 6 of those. They're also the same. So let's start putting this Bravo rack together and get this installation knocked out. For the Alpha rack, your kit ships with 8 load bars. They are all the same length and same size. They can be used at any position within the roof rack when you get to that point. You've got your Groove Tech. The Groove Tech is technically the only part of this roof rack system that is a driver and passenger side. If you look at the riv nuts, they are much thicker and stick out further on one side than the other. We'll talk about the differences between them during the assembly, but the Groove Tech, it'll be important that you put them on the right side of the vehicle. The armor can be used on left or right, doesn't matter. They're not indexed to one side or the other. I gotta breathe. You've got your windscreen. This truck ultimately gets a no cut. There are many options on our website, and depending on what you picked, you'll want to check out our lighting guide before you get to that point, because in some applications we tell you to put the lighting in before you put it on the roof rack. In other applications we tell you to put the lighting in after. That's just based on the experience that some are heavier than others, and it's easier to install certain setups on the truck once it's installed. So go check that video out if you guys are installing lighting. You also have your mounting system, which is a 2-piece design. It's got your rivet base with your load bar clamp. All 6 of them are the same. We'll get to that part here in a second. So for now, let's gather up our stuff and get this Alpha rack assembled and on this truck. There's some common steps that take place between the Alpha and Bravo roof rack as far as how we actually design this rack to mount to the vehicle. One of the first things that we need to do is assemble the feet with your rivet base here, which is your 1370. And your load bar clamp. Now my prototype models say SD on them. Yours will actually say 1375 as a part number. And what we're going for is that somewhere in here these bolt together, lining up across these holes to set the proper height and spacing of the load bars away from the roof of the vehicle and the sunroof and things like that. 4 of these feet will assemble the exact same way, and then the 2 front feet will assemble completely different. The only other thing to talk about is, because when we do these videos we have to do the Alpha and the Bravo rack, and in a case like this where we're drilling and riveting the roof of the vehicle, some of these steps have to be completed entirely and it's impossible to go backwards. So ultimately this truck gets an Alpha roof rack on it. The hardware that you see us using to put these feet together will come out of bag 8001.4. And if you're using a Bravo kit, your bag will simply just say feet to rack. There's a difference between the two. I hope that's not loud in that camera. On the Bravo racks, you're using a standard button head metric fastener. This is 5 millimeters, and the nuts are going to be 13 millimeter wrench. On the Alpha, we're using a hex head bolt, and you'll have a 1/2-inch wrench or socket for the head, as well as a 1/2-inch wrench or socket for the nylock. In both cases, there will be some washers that you'll use, and because we're using the nylocks, there's not going to be any thread locker. So I'm going to set up the rear and the middle feet first, then we'll set up the front feet. I'm going to assemble 1 foot with the Bravo hardware just so you guys can see how it goes together. You've got your standard button head bolt and a flat washer. Both of those will be the exact same. Each one of these feet will require this exact setup. For the rear and middle feet, I want to put this, see where these holes line up here? I want 1 exposed hole at the top of the assembly here, like this. That's going to set the proper height. So not all the way down, not all the way up. Basically, the bolts are going to go through the second hole from the top in the load bar clamp. through the top hole in the rivet base. So it should be sitting like this. And your nylocks go on the rear. And just to save yourself some headache when you go to tighten this up, if you're doing this now, go ahead and use a 5mm Allen and a 13mm wrench and tighten these down about 90% of the way so that the feet will still set and flex a little bit like this, but you don't want to stand up on the truck and work with the tools to tighten them all the way up. So I'll show that with the Alpha hardware, but the distance that you take this nylock in for the Bravo would be the exact same. I've switched over and I've grabbed the Alpha hardware from bag 8001.4. I'm going to assemble the rear and middle feet first. There will be 4 feet that are identical. I'm going to position this so that the holes look like this right here. So I'm going to be using the second hole from the top on the actual load bar clamp and the top hole on the rivet base to set the proper height for the rear and middle feet. So bolt and flat washer through the front. Same thing in both locations. And then just flip it over backwards. Put the nylock on there. Then I'm going to use my 1/2-inch socket and 1/2-inch wrench, and I want to tighten these bolts about 90% of the way. You want to leave enough wiggle room so that we can account for the slope of the roof of the truck, but you don't want to leave so much hardware undone that you got to stand up there forever when it comes time to tighten these up all the way. Go a little bit further. A little bit more. That's pretty good right there. So you see I got about, I don't know, maybe 3 millimeters of thread sticking out the end of that nylock. That's going to give me about yay much play. So it's on the truck like this, the load bar connects here. I can wiggle this back and forth about that much. That's a pretty good amount to get us started. Go ahead and tighten up that bolt. Then assemble 3 feet the exact same way. So once I've got the first 4 put together, you'll have 4 identical feet used for the rear and the middle that are assembled just like this. 1 exposed set of holes at the top, 2 empties underneath the bolt, and they're in the top of the load bar clamp. So, you see that right there? And there are 4, which leaves us 2 sets, and those are going to be for the front. It's magic. Should talk about it before we tighten it. So you have the same parts for the front, but the position is going to be very different. If you look behind me, see how the truck slopes off really hard at the front? That means that the distance between the roof of the truck and the front load bar is going to be exponentially higher than it is at the rear. And to do that without a bunch of additional aluminum spacers, we're going to use the adjustability in these feet to offset that height to that front load bar so that the roof rack is level on the truck. You're going to use the bottom set of holes in the load bar clamp and the upper set of holes in the rivet base. Just line them up. Put in the last of the hardware that you've got. And go ahead and tighten those down the same amount. You want about 4 millimeters, 3 millimeters maybe of exposed thread out the back. Just enough that it has a little bit of wiggle to adjust it, but it's not going to take a long time to tighten up once the rack's mounted. So now I've got the 2 front feet put together. They're at the topmost position that they can actually mount to. Now we're going to go back and load this slot in all 6 feet. You need the hardware that says foot to load bar. In that bag of hardware that says feet to load bars, you're going to find a bunch of short button head bolts like this with lock washers and flat washers. Ultimately, each bolt gets a lock washer and a flat washer. They'll be assembled to look like that. The lock washer always goes next to the bolt. It never goes under the flat washer. That's not how those work. In your hardware kit, you also have some VC3 thread locker. Before we're ready to put these in, we want to put this thread locker on all of these bolts. And about the last 4 or 5 threads, and hold this up where you guys can see it. About that far, right there. Just so it engages with the threaded inserts in these tracks. This is what attaches the whole roof rack assembly together to the load bars, and then the feet mount to the truck. So it's super critical that you guys get this thread locker on here and it's right. Once you put that thread locker on, you're going to let it dry for, call it 10 or 15 minutes. It comes out as a liquid and it's super sticky. When it's ready to use, it's cured in the air for 10 or 15 minutes, and when you touch it, it shouldn't be sticky or stringy anymore. It should just be there. It's like rubbery. The VC3 never fully cures. It's always going to be rubbery like that. So think of it like a shock absorber for your hardware, so to speak, so that when you're out there really dipping and banging on the trails and that roof rack's taking like the beating of a lifetime, that VC3 keeps those bolts from being able to twist one way or the other to loosen up. But that VC3 sets inside of those threads there and absorbs that initial shock. So go ahead and put the VC3 on all the bolts and let that cure for 10 or 15 minutes, and then we'll preload our feet. The other stuff in the bag of foot to load bar are these threaded inserts. I'm going to move this around so you guys can really see the detail on this. We have two variants of threaded insert. I don't have to tell you guys, with COVID, some supply chains do tighten up and we had to source these in different places. They both physically do the same job, but they will look a little different. This is kind of the version B of them. The other version is a little bit more flat and has a protrusion on the outside where the other side is flat. On this version, where it's thick and channeled like that, that should go to the inside edge of the foot. So like this right here. Let's see if I can really get that down. So flat edge goes to the groove, and the sculpted edge goes to the inside of the flat spot here. On the other type of threaded insert, which I don't have in front of me right now, with the protrusions, the flat side still goes to the foot base here, and those little protrusions that are on it will stick to the inside by the top of this flat part of the foot. Each one of these threaded inserts is going to get 3 bolts with the lock washers and the flat washers like that. And you want to preload all of them, but you don't want to tighten anything up. You need a little bit of play in these feet so that, see how this moves back and forth? The looser this is, while it'll still keep the hardware in place, that's where your load bar slides across. So on the truck, it's going to be sitting like this, and then the other one will be sitting across from it. And you need to be able to have them loose enough that you can just slide the load bars across the vehicle to do this roof rack installation by yourself. If you get these too tight, you suck the bolts up, they're too tight to slide into the channel, and you'll just never get them started. So go ahead and load all 6 of your feet just like this, and then we'll be ready to put the load bars in. I have all the hardware started. Obviously the 2 taller feet are for the front, and you can see all the bolts, and I've still got them really loose in here. That is critical that you guys don't fully tighten those. And then I've got the 4 feet that are set up the same for the middle and the rear. With these feet, it doesn't matter where they're going to go. They're all 4 set to be the same height. So now go grab 3 of your load bars, and we'll preload the feet. The load bars, it'll look like kind of like just a bar system at first when we set them up on the roof, and then we'll use the sides to set the spacing. I'm starting with the front feet, so I've got 1 load bar here. And just to reiterate the point, all 8 load bars are the exact same, so it doesn't matter which one that you use. On your load bar, across the top, it's 2 inches wide, so you have 2 grooves. And then on the side, it's 1 inch wide, so it only has the 1 groove. On the 1 inch side is where this threaded insert is going to align. So if I take this like, yay, line that guy up, see how the foot just sits in there like that? So we're in on this side here. Get it up so you guys can see it. And then this is all put together. Now the opposite front foot, since they're both the same, when I put it on the other end, it'll be on the opposite side of the load bar. That's actually designed to be that way because it prevents the load bars from twisting. So on one side it's on this, and on the other side it's on this, and then when you guys take it and put it on the truck, one of them will be facing backwards, the other side will be facing forward. It doesn't really matter to me which way you guys set that up. It's irrelevant because of the way these feet assemble. On one side they'll all be facing one direction, on the other side they'll all be facing the opposite direction. you can't really get it wrong and there is no left and right. Just be aware that the taller of the 2 feet that you've got on that load bar, those would be in the front of the truck, with the other 2 assemblies being in the middle and the rear of the truck. So go ahead and grab 2 more load bars and put your middle and rear feet together. At this point, get down low, you can see the front setup, how it's much taller, and then the middle and rear are the same height. Right now, the position that you have this sitting, because they'll just slide back and forth like this, it doesn't really matter where that's at, and this is loose enough that you guys have the adjustability in it to move them. We're going to start by putting the rear one on the truck first. Let me move the camera. Let's see, yeah, that's good. So the base of that rivet clamp is going to be in this channel eventually. Before we're putting the load bars up here, we need to clean this channel. I've still got masking tape on this because this is a prototype vehicle. You guys do not have to masking tape up your truck. But see this inner channel right here with the seam sealer? You need to clean that on both sides. We're gonna attach, in your kit, you've got some foam gasket tape. We're gonna line that up and attach that here. And that's gonna be the lower area of sealant for the holes that you're gonna drill for the rivets that attach the feet to the truck. I just use a window cleaner and a microfiber towel. So I'm gonna go grab those 2 things, clean this up, get the adhesive on both sides, the foam tape, and then we'll be ready to start placing the load bars. This truck's only got a few thousand miles on it, but there was quite a bit of dirt built up in those gasket areas there, and we want to get that as clean as we can get it because the adhesive on this foam tape will stick and it'll last a long time. But if there's a bunch of dirt and dust underneath there, it's never going to stick and it's just going to pop up and look like shit and cause you guys some issues. So I've got both sides cleaned up. Now I'm ready to apply the foam tape. You'll need a tape measure and some scissors for this part, and I'll show you guys how to get it positioned and stuck down. At the back of the cab of your truck, you guys have this little black plastic cap here. We're going to use this as the measurement point for starting the foam tape, as well as where the roof rack will eventually line up to. For the foam tape, you need to measure 5 inches up this channel from the back of that plastic lip right there, up 5 inches. So I'll just kind of mark that on the seam sealer with my claw. Peel the backing off the tape about 8 or 10 inches to start with. I'm going to start that right there. Make sure that it seats itself fully down inside. And once I get it stuck in here, I'll come back and show you guys the actual fitment. But I'm here. So I've started like the first 10 inches or so. The backing is still stuck. Now I'll just run it, pulling off maybe 10, 12 inches at a time. You don't want to pull on this tape and stretch it. You want it to kind of lay flat so that it keeps the dimension that it ships in. And it should lay nice and flat down in that gasket. So this is on the passenger side of the vehicle, 5 inches from here to the edge of the foam tape, and then it just runs all the way down, and it should fall pretty short of the windshield right here. Once we get the roof rack positioned and get the feet up, we'll trim off the excess on the edge of the front foot and the edge of the rear foot and just take that part out and discard it. But that midsection will stay in there the whole time that the roof rack's on the vehicle. So I'm gonna go put the foam tape on the other side. It's the exact same dimension. Then we'll be ready to grab those load bar clamps and get them positioned up here and set in place. I've set the rear assembly up. It's the shorter one, right? So there's a short one that goes here, there's a short one that'll go in the middle, and then the very tall one goes up towards the front of the vehicle. To locate this, you're going to use a tape measure again, and we're simply just going to measure from that black plastic piece again forward towards the front of the truck 8 inches, and move that foot so that the edge of the lip of the foot here, so basically right beside where the rivet goes, this edge to this edge should be 8 inches on both sides of the truck. And you can see I don't have it on the passenger side and it's sitting kind of like this. It'll fall so that this load bar is right in front of that antenna. You've got plenty of clearance without the need for like a weird thin fin or anything like that. I'm gonna make that measurement over on the other side and then we'll keep going. I've got both sides set to 8 inches from here to the edge. I don't want you guys to freak out or spend too much time on that right now. The 8 inches matters a little bit later on in the installation, but for right now it's just a good benchmark so that when we grab the sides and go to put them up here, that at least the roof rack is kind of sitting in the right spot at the rear, and you'll use the sides of the roof rack to line up where the middle and the front feet go. So we'll always be able to drop back and measure between that plastic piece and the edge of that rear foot to 8 inches to make sure that you guys get the roof rack sitting right where it's supposed to before you drill any holes. The rear foot set in place, and I've got my measurement, my 8 inches from that plastic to the edge. The middle foot I just set up here, the front foot I just set up here. I'm not worried about measuring those right now. The exact placement for those will be set with the sides of the roof rack. So I'm going to reposition the camera. You guys grab a 5/32 Allen wrench, the bag of hardware that says load bars, and then the 2 sides of the roof rack, so that we'll go back, we'll line up the sides to the holes in the end of the load bar, and initially get those sides hung up on the truck. At this point, you've got the foam tape attached. The 3 load bars are up on top of the truck. These steps up to this point are the exact same for the Alpha and the Bravo roof rack. So if you're installing a Bravo rack, just continue watching along this video. I'll show you how to put the sides up, how to align everything, make the measurements before it's time to drill the holes and install the rivets. If you're installing an Alpha roof rack, go ahead and skip to that part of the video unless you guys just want to watch me for another 20 minutes put a Bravo roof rack together. I wouldn't recommend it. I'm not funny, I'm not cute. Our editing quality sucks. Like, I just wouldn't bother. If you're installing the Alpha, go ahead and go to that part of the video where we start with the groove tech. In this video, because it's a Bravo, or this part of the video, because it's a Bravo, we'll be starting with the sides, and they are not indexed driver and passenger. So for the last time, if you're installing a Bravo, keep watching. If you're installing an Alpha, go ahead and zip to that part of the video for me. For the Bravo rack, grab the bag of hardware that just says load bars on it. There's no part number or anything crazy like that. In that, you're going to have a bunch of bolts that are 1 inch long and a lock washers that go with them. Make sure every one of the bolts in your kit has a lock washer attached to it. I'm going to go ahead and gather up 6 of them, and I'm going to set 2 on each load bar so I don't have to fumble around and find them. Get them up here like that. And right now I've just got a side sitting up on top. It's going to make it a little easier for me to get to, and I've got a 5/32 Allen wrench. Because I measured off the rear, that's where I'm going to anchor it first. And if you guys look at this side, ignore the front 2 slots that are on top of each other. That's for the very front load bar, and we'll worry about that one later. Right now we're going to be attaching these load bars in these small 1 inch wide slots. There's 1, 2, and 3 of them. That rear one is going to line up to the rear load bar that we put in place here. I'm just going to set this roof rack in place. Start that hardware there by hand in both locations. That'll keep it from twisting on me. Then I'll adjust the middle foot so that I can line up that hardware and start it. And finally the front one. And once you've got those middle 2 in, you can kind of let it go. It'll just sit there. The front foot, I'm just going to pick up and line up the load bar. And once you've got all 6 of those bolts started, you can use that 5/32 and go ahead and fully tighten those bolts. So I've got all 6 bolts tightened for the load bar locations. And again, just to make sure you guys have it in the right spot, these front 2 slots you're not going to use right now. It'll be the slot behind it, then skip 1, the small slot behind that guy, skip 1, and then the small slot between these 2 here. So grab 6 more bolts in the other side and go put that on the side of the truck. As far as placement right now, with everything loose like we've left it, I can just move the roof rack from left to right, no problem. It'll just slide back and forth. That's one of the last things that we'll measure and set in place before we complete the installation. Ultimately right now we just want to get the sides attached so that we can mark and drill the holes for the rivets to get the feet attached. With both sides attached, we're ready to make a couple of measurements, and then we'll finally drill this and install the rivets that secure the bases to the drip rails of the truck. So we'll have them take the camera around the truck now and kind of show you guys a progress report up to this point. I'm not following you, but if I follow you, I don't end up in the shot. I'm back on top of the truck with the tape measure. We're going to measure that same thing that we did for the gasket, only this time we want to make sure that we're at 8 inches from the back of the rear rivet foot to the edge of that plastic. I am setting it about 8 1/4 inches, so I'm just going to push this back a little bit on this side. There's 8 inches from here to here on both sides of the truck. That'll keep that part square. And then as far as placement inside the drip rail, over your foam here, you want to make sure that the outside edge of this rivet base is closest to the outside edge of the truck. That provides clearance between the rivet base and the painted surface behind. If you've got it too far in like that and you go to rivet it down, when it pulls it down, that back of that foot could scratch your paint. So just make sure that it's out towards the outside edge. Those small holes in there that you see inside of that rivet foot, that's where we're going to use that 3/16 inch drill bit to drill the holes where we'll install the rivets. So for this next step, you just need a standard rivet gun. You guys can get these at just about any hardware store. I think even AutoZone carries a version of this. You're going to need a cordless drill. I use a hammer just to help set the rivets to get everything pressed down. And again, that tape measure, because we're going to want to verify these rear feet are where we need them before we start drilling holes in the drip rail. So again, I'm shooting for 8 inches. I'm there. Don't worry about both sides being the same right now. You want to get one side mounted and locked down. That way if you're off by just a little bit, which we give you guys enough room that you can be, you can make that measurement over here, go line it up to the other side, adjust that, and then drill and install the other side. So I'm going to get my stuff together. Now we'll drill the holes in these rivet bases and install the rivets. So down inside your rivet base, there's a large circle, which you guys don't need to concern yourselves with at all. And then there's a small interior circle. That small interior circle is the exact same size as your drill bit and the exact same size as your rivet. So we've given you guys a drill bit to do this modification with. Just push it down into the foam, try and hold the drill as upright and straight as you can, and then run the drill until you drill that hole. If you go slow, you'll feel it go through the seam sealer, then you'll feel it break through the first little layer of metal, then you'll see it go through the last one, and that's when you can just stop. There's plenty of room underneath there. There's nothing that you're really going to hit. If you pay attention to what the drill sounds like, I'll try and do this in a way, and you'll hear your cordless drill. They all do the same thing. As they start to go through and the torque backs off of them, you can kind of hear this thing drill this hole. So you heard it catch that first little bit. That's that first layer of metal, which is actually the outside skin of the truck. Then where the roof comes over and they lip them together, that's what you're drilling through. So you'll hear it go through the next layer. There it goes. That's all the way through on that one. So you can pick the rack up, blow that out of the way, set that back over where that hole goes, and drill the next one. All right, got those two in place right there. I'm going to install those rivets. Go ahead and do that. We'll put these rivets in and you guys just complete the process at the same two locations, the middle and the front on this side of the rack. So to install the rivet, take your rivet gun. You need the 1/8" mandrel. The one that we have has extras. Most of the ones that I've seen them have at least 3 different sizes on them, and they all seem to have 1/8". The stem part goes in the head of the rivet gun. That's got the dome at the top up here, and then the actual part that compresses goes into the vehicle. So if I line that up through the foot and then down, it'll drop through that hole that we drilled. So I want to push down on it, and I want to put one crank on this rivet and kind of lock this back one in place, then release it and go do the same thing on the opposite side so that both of them are started before I try and fully seat and compress either one of them. That keeps it from basically sucking the foot down on one side into the foam gasket and the seam sealer and making the other side really hard to get level and flat without somebody standing over your shoulder pushing down. If you do it this way, you can do this by yourself, no problem. If you accidentally fully seat one all the way, you may need somebody to help push down on the head of your rivet gun just to keep tension on it and keep the foot flat while you're setting these rivets. So I got one good pull on that one. Just slide it off and do the same thing on the other side. Okay. With one pull on them, I have this foot set flat in that foam rubber right here. It's not teetering, I'm not pulling more on one side than the other. Now I can go back and put the rivet gun on here and set both of these rivets. You'll pull on them. It's going to get you probably 2, 2.5, maybe 3 pulls. It just depends on the truck. When you hear it snap, it's going to make a real loud pop. That's why they call it a pop rivet. That's actually the stem of the rivet breaking and snapping off because the rivet's fully seated inside the roof of the truck. Hear it pop. And then there's your stem. And if you kind of operate this a few times or flip it backwards, usually those will just fall right out. Of course the camera's on, so it's not gonna do, there it goes. That's what's left of it right there. So I'm gonna do the same thing here. Once you've got this one down, the length of these, like the position, this is set. So as long as you have them sitting where we tell you to along this outside edge, you can just work your way down the truck, drill out each hole, and go ahead and half install the rivet on both sides, and then come back and fully seat them. So I've got the passenger side all drilled and riveted in place. Now you guys go take your tape measure and the same tools, go to the other side of the truck, compare your rear measurement, set the driver's side to the same thing as the passenger side that we've already anchored. Now do that same thing, drill the holes, install the rivets. The rack will be mounted up, then there's just one little step of sealant, then we'll move on to the rest of the roof rack parts. The rivets that we ship with you, when you compress them, in theory, they're watertight, but we don't really just drive these trucks and park them up and down the road. We take them out and beat the shit out of them. They're always in the dust and the mud. So just as an extra layer of precaution, we're going to use a pure silicone sealant over the head of each rivet. I'll show you guys how we put it on here. So just a little bit around it, and then I'll just smooth it down with my hand. And mainly I'm working on sealing up just that open hole where that rod pulled through. Make sure that when you're done, all 12 rivets have that sealant on them. Whoa, that was a lot. There's Dave's cone. Now we're ready to install the windscreen. The windscreen needs to go in before the very front load bar just because of the design of this roof rack and how tight the tolerances are. If you install that front load bar first, you really can't get your hands in there to access the bolts for the windscreen. It's best to have two people to put the windscreen on. I went and got Drew. He's going to set the camera up and help me put this up here. Let me show you guys this up close. See the two holes at the end of your roof rack right here? They're on the 45-degree angle here. Those correspond to the flange that is bent at the end of each end of your windscreen. The windscreen's installed to the inside of the roof rack, not the outside, so the flange will always go to the inside closest to the vehicle on both sides. Then you'll just slide the hardware through, use a 3/16" Allen and a 1/2" wrench to tighten up the hardware. So we've got the camera sitting on the hood of the truck. Drew's on the driver's side, I'm on the passenger side. I'm just going to hand it over to him. We'll line up the holes and start by sliding the bolts in place. And then you can reach through this opening between the forward load bar and the windscreen to install the hardware. Drew is out of practice, so he dropped the nut. 3/16" Allen and a 1/2" wrench. Wrench goes on the inside of the roof rack, Allen goes on the outside, and then just tighten that hardware up. It fits good. If your windscreen has lighting in it, you guys should have already watched that video like we suggested. If you've got lighting in here, you got any wiring to complete, now is probably the time to do that with the majority of the load bars out of the roof rack. It just gives you more room to get your hands in there to hide all your wiring. If you're not doing lighting, you don't have any wiring to do, there's no lighting in the windscreen, we're ready to throw in the remaining load bars. You've got a feature and an option on the Bravo rack for the front and rear load bar where you can actually mount them either horizontally, like the remaining load bars, or you can flip them and use these two slots vertically so that you can really dial in like a long light bar, like a rectangular light bar to the front of the front load bar to line up on like our universal 40 fairing. At the rear, you also have two locations. You can mount it horizontal, just like the other load bars, or you can use these two holes and you can mount it vertically. The reason that we always give you that option on our roof racks when it'll fit is because our load bars, just like everybody else's, they're a lot stronger when they're vertical than horizontal. So this truck has a bed rack on it, but if it didn't and you were going to be getting up on the cab of the truck through the bed, your first point of contact would be that rear load bar, and the natural deflection of a load bar turned on its side versus when it's upright, so 2-inch side facing you, in that configuration it's a whole lot stronger and it makes a great first step for when you're getting on the rack. I've got all the load bars started. You guys, if you're following along, you should be at this exact same step. Couple things I want to point out. One, we have not put in the very front load bar yet. If you peek up over the top, we need that front load bar out to tighten up these bolts when the time comes. So the very front load bar will actually be the last thing that you do before your installation is complete. If you look at the remaining locations of the load bars, you have some adjustment in here so that you can scoot the load bars forward and backwards to help line up on like obscure pieces of gear and stuff like that. It doesn't matter where you put the load bars in those locations. What matters is that it's in the same location on the rack on both sides of the truck. If it's not, then your load bars in all cockeyed and it can cause the sides of the rack to bow. So just make sure that if it's pulled all the way back on the passenger side, it's all the way back in that same location on the driver's side. Once you have those adjusted, we'll go back and tighten up the remaining load bar bolts. Then we're ready to center the rack and start tightening up the foot hardware. The next step is to make a couple simple measurements and get the rack centered on the vehicle. We talked in the beginning about how you can float the rack, you can move it from left to right across these feet. I'm going to use a tape measure, and I want to measure from the inside of the edge of the rack to the outside right here of our load bar clamp, the part of our foot. I want to make a measurement on the passenger side, then go compare that measurement over on the driver's side, then adjust the rack from driver to passenger until that number is the same on both sides of the truck. Once I have that, we'll be ready to tighten up that hardware. You'll do the rear first, then the middle, and finally the front. All right, so I've made my measurements. I've got all 6 load bar clamps measured out, centered, and fully tightened to my load bars. Drew, you can back up and kind of show them how centered we are on the truck. The next step, you're going to need a pair of 1/2-inch wrenches for the Alpha rack. For a Bravo rack, you would need a 5mm Allen wrench and a 13mm wrench. As we explained earlier in this video, ultimately this truck gets an Alpha rack on it before it goes home to the owner. So our Bravo rack is being put together load bar clamp to rivet base with the hex bolts that come in an Alpha kit. So for this one, you're going to see me using 1/2-inch wrenches. If you've got a Bravo rack in field at your house, you'll be using a 5mm Allen and a 13mm wrench. So now I'm going to start at the back. I just want to grab a hold of that bolt head there and use my cheating arrow on my fancy ratchet wrench and go ahead and snug those bolts down tight. And you're going to do the same thing. Each location will have 2 bolts that need to be fully tightened. So this guy's all locked up. Now I need to go do the middle and the front, and then go do all 3 feet on the other side of the truck. So that's almost it, guys. We've got the feet tightened up. The rack is absolutely just beast mode locked to the top of the truck, and move the whole thing with one hand. All that's left is to determine how we want to put this front load bar in, bolt that thing in. Once you put your front load bar in, you get it settled in, tighten it all up, go to the end of this video and check out the torque specifications PDF that we provided. Go over all the hardware on the roof rack, tighten everything down to that exact torque specification, and periodically inspect the rack, check the hardware, the load bars, all that stuff, just to make sure that those bolts stay seated and tight. And if you ever need any spare parts or have questions or just want to tell us how your trip went, reach out to support@uptopoverland.com. Thanks. This part of the video covers the assembly and the final installation of the Alpha roof rack for the 2022 Frontier. Again, this is a Pro 4X crew cab. At this stage, when you get here, you should already have the 3 load bars sitting up on top of the roof. If you don't, you need to go back and watch that part of the video before you get to here. As we described in the beginning of the video, the Alpha and the Bravo share the same mounting system, and the process for getting to this point is the exact same. So in order to keep these videos manageable, we've kind of consolidated the common parts between one portion of the video, and some of that information is contained inside of the Bravo installation side. It's important to note that when we prototype these vehicles, we have to do the installations from start to finish so that we can actually test them for wind noise and rigidity and how much weight they'll hold and stuff like that. And right now, I've already got the feet are mounted permanently to the vehicle with our drill and rivet method. In your instance, they won't be. They'll be free floating up here. So I'm kind of cheating the system a little bit in that I'm already anchored in the right place. I do have my load bars loose still. We'll be able to show you that part of it, but Drew works pretty good magic when he does the videos, so hopefully he can pile this all in and make it make sense. We're going to start by hanging the driver and passenger side groove tech. So let me grab a piece of that and I'll explain what they are, and we'll go from there. So the first step is going to be to hang the groove tech on the driver and passenger side of the vehicle. Like we talked about when we showed you guys all the major components of the Alpha rack, the groove tech's the only thing that has a specific driver and passenger side, and that is because of the rib nuts that we install before we ship these parts out to you. The flat side here should always be the outside, which makes this a driver. The protrusion will always face the inside of the vehicle. If you get them backwards, it'll interfere with the spacers that go between the armor and the groove tech and cause misalignment and make it hard to put together. Grab the hardware from bag 8001.2. In that, you've got 1-inch button head bolts and lock washers. Each bolt should get a lock washer on it. See that little guy right there? And then when you look along the groove tech, see these short slots? There's one here, there's one to the middle, and one back here towards the rear. Those are the 3 anchor points for the 3 load bars that we have up on the roof. So I'll just take them and put them up there by hand to start with. Because there's no adjustability in these load bars, you can go ahead and take a 5/32 Allen wrench and fully tighten them. Once you have the driver's side on, go do the same thing on the passenger side. Once you've got the driver and passenger side anchored in place, you've got all 6 bolts on each side locked in so that the groove tech's fully attached to the load bars. We're ready to put the windscreen in. Grab the bag of hardware that says 8001.3. That's the right number? Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, 8001.3 and a 5mm Allen wrench and a 13mm wrench. Before we get into this, the windscreen that goes on this truck is a no-cut option from us. You could have definitely requested different cut or style for this windscreen. You may or may not have lighting to do right now. We've got a lighting guide video that you guys should definitely go check out if you're installing light bars, because in some instances we tell you to put the light bar in before you put in the windscreen, and other applications will tell you to do it after. It really just depends on which one you're doing. So go check that video out before you stick this windscreen in, but if you're doing a no cut like we are, we can go ahead and go now. So if you look at the end of your windscreen, you see those machined holes in the bent flange? Those will align to the 2 holes at the end of your groove tech. And the flange always goes to the inside of the groove tech up here. If you try and lay it on the outside, you're gonna have alignment issues on the other side. So I've got our ever faithful Drew over here to help me today. We're just gonna pick it up, put it in place. Hurry up. We're going to pick it up, put it in place, line up those holes. We'll push the bolts through the hole in the groove tech and the hole in the windscreen, and then reach inside and put the nylocks on. I'm still waiting on Drew.
The watch is very cumbersome.
You're out of practice.
Yeah.
That's what it
Too
is.
much camera time.
I've been doing this for all year, prototype, new vehicle.
And I've just been editing videos.
Uh-huh.
For free.
Yeah, for free. All right. Well, I mean, not necessarily for free.
We're free.
We're free. Oh, okay.
You pay me.
That's true. That's true. Okay. So let's just grab the camera and put it up here, and we'll show how to tighten them. Go in there. So the reason that we have you put the windscreen in before you put in the other load bars is if you install that front load bar right now, click, 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 can't get wrenches and tools in here. So just reach inside the windscreen with a 13, the 5mm on the outside, and tighten up those bolts. They're nylocks, so just crank them all the way down until they get hard to turn, and they're tight enough. I've got the front windscreen all bolted in. Well, I say Drew helped. You saw it. You saw it. He was here. Now I'm ready to put in the front and rear load bar. But before we do that, I want to talk to you guys about the options that we give you in the design of this roof rack. At the front, you're going to find 2 horizontal slots that are above each other that are the exact same size. And then in between that is a smaller rectangle. The front load bar can be mounted in this location in the same orientation as the one beside it, or it can be flipped to mount vertically using the 2 slots for the 2 holes at the end If you mount it vertically like that, you use this interior smaller rectangle to discreetly pass wiring through the load bars from one side of the roof rack to the other. And the reason that we give you this vertical option is if you guys are running the big setups, the LP4s, 6s, 9s, some of the larger rigid light bars and stuff like that, you may not think about it when it's all on your workbench, but by the time you get them up on the roof rack, they weigh 60, 70, 80 pounds for all those lights. These load bars are much stronger when they're vertical than horizontal, and to keep those lights as stable as we can when you guys are banging down the trails, if you're installing those larger lighting arrays, we really recommend that you put that front load bar in vertically. At the rear, you have a similar option. You can go horizontal here and the wiring would pass through this small rectangle, or you can mount it vertically back here and go through this rectangle for the wiring. It'll make more sense when you throw them up there and you can see through from one side to the other. But for now, I recommend in the back that you put that rear load bar in vertically because, again, they're stronger. And if you guys aren't running a bed rack back there and you're going to be getting up and down on the roof rack, it's nice to have that first point of contact be as strong as it can be. So we'll put the rear and front load bars in both vertically in this configuration. You're going to use the hardware from bag 8001.1, and you need a 7/16 inch wrench or ratchet. The three remaining load bars that you have will mount into these longer horizontal slots located towards the front of the roof rack here, the midsection, and then in between the last two load bars. You can put those load bars anywhere within that slot, and you can move them anytime you want to help line up on different pieces of gear so that you're not drilling a bunch of holes and shit trying to get things to mount up. What's important is that wherever you rest that load bar on the driver's side, as far as where it's at in that slot, that it matches on the other side of the truck to keep the load bar square. You don't want to put it all the way forward on one side and all the way back on the other because the load bar will be kicked and it'll cause the roof rack to bow. So that leftover hardware that you have from 8001.2 and your 5/32 Allen wrench, I'll go back and put these three load bars in. Then we're going to be ready to center the rack and start tightening the feet. With all 8 load bars fully secured in the Groove Tech, we're ready to use a tape measure. We're going to make some measurements up here, get the rack centered. We'll tighten up the hardware to the load bars first, then we'll come back and tighten up the feet. It's a very simple process to do this. Use your tape measure and you're going to measure from the inside of your Groove Tech, so facing the roof of the truck, to the outside edge of your load bar clamp. Right there, I'm setting about 4 and 11/16. So now I'll go to the passenger side at the same location and I'll make that measurement again. And if I'm off, I'll just push the rack left to right until I get those numbers to read the same on both sides. Once I've got that done, tighten up all 6 bolts here with a 5/32 Allen wrench, so 3 on this side and 3 on that side, and then repeat the process at the middle and the rear of the vehicle. If you have problems getting the rack to slide back and forth, most likely you've got your foot bolts or your load bar bolts too tight to allow free movement of the roof rack. You should loosen those up. It should just freely move. So I've got the rack centered on the vehicle. I've got all 6 feet attached to the load bar up here, so all the small bolts are all tightened up. Rack's pretty short up right now. I need a pair of 1/2-inch wrenches. You're going to reach down inside the roof rack here, and the 2 bolts that mate the load bar clamp to the rivet base, you just go around the truck and tighten them all up. For this next step, you're going to use the hardware out of bag 8001.5. You're going to have 35mm bolts with lock washers and then some HDPE plastic spacers. The spacers will go between the armor and the Groove Tech to provide a channel to conceal all of your wiring. With your armor, there is no driver and passenger side. You can use either one on either side of the vehicle. I like to start by anchoring at this front point up here where you can see that rib nut, and at the rear, because these remaining rib nuts are for your grab handles, but we'll get to that in a minute. I start at the back of the rack, just slide the bolt through the hole with the lock washer, and then I'm going to take that spacer and put it over the bolt so that it sticks through like this right here. And then I just line that up to that rib nut. Use a 5mm Allen wrench to get it tight enough to hold it in place so I can go to the other end. And then do the exact same thing at the front. Once I've got the armor attached like that, I'll go do the same thing on the other side, and all we've got left are grab handles. So before you get to this point, you guys need to break off from here and go check out the really good video that Drew did of tying our grab handles, because you do have to lace them up and get them ready before you can put them on the truck. Grab the hardware from bag 8001.6. You're going to find the longer M8 bolts in there with the lock washers. The lock washers go on the face side of the lace plate, so between the bolt head and there. Bolts face this way. Go ahead and put 2 plastic spacers over the threads of the bolts. Line them up on the holes in the roof rack. And then in between the armor and groove tack, you just hold a spacer in line with that hole. Line them up to the riv nut like that, and then tighten them up with a 5mm Allen wrench. So you'll have 3 more handles that you got to put on. So you guys go do that. I'm going to finish this one and put my handles on. Then we'll come back and talk about the finish up. So that wraps up the installation for the Alpha roof rack on the 2022 Frontier. Go to the end of this video and check the link for the PDF specs that we provide for you guys for torque specifications. Work your way all the way around the roof rack with a good torque wrench. Make sure everything's tight like we say it should be. Then inspect the rack, especially after heavy use, and you guys take big trips and stuff like that. Come back over it, just make sure all the bolts are tight. Make sure everything's in working order. If you have any questions about this installation or any of the products that you've seen in this video, reach out to support@uptopoverland.com. We'll get back to you as quick as we can. Thanks guys, enjoy.